Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us here on what is a very special occasion. I always enjoy interviewing Mr. Murthy, and I've been doing this now for almost 15 years. I remember my very first conversation with him very vividly at the Infosys campus, and he has played a mentor role for me in my professional career as well. So, Mr. Murthy, once again, thank you very much for joining us here today. You heard that long introduction and his many achievements and the many awards and recognition that he's got. But today, I'm not going to focus on the Infosys global delivery model. I'm not going to talk about the software industry in India. I am going to focus on the 6 C's, Mr. Murthy. Companionship, communication, competition, collaboration, compassion, and conscience. And I would like you to give me your views on all of that. But I want to start by talking to you about the city that we are in here today, Pune. You spent about 5 years in the city, and you believe that those were the best years of your lives. And ladies and gentlemen, there's a reason for that, and that is because he was chasing a girl.
Exactly.
You want to relive that story?
Well, first of all, Shereen, I must say it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have this conversation with you. I have always been a great admirer of what you have contributed to the Indian television industry. My time in Pune, as I pointed out to you at lunch, was at my quick lunch. You haven't had your lunch, so was perhaps the best part of my life, because that was the time when I was chasing a girl. And as those of you, the men here, know how difficult it is to do that. Sometimes it could be perilous, sometimes it could be joyful. It is just that, I came here in 1970, end of 74, from France, where I used to work. And then it so happened that I had a friend of mine who was on a deputation to Telco as a Tata Administrative Services trainee, and he stayed with me, and he was the one who introduced me to Sudha. And
was it love at first sight for you?
Sorry?
Was it love at first sight for you?
For me, yes. I don't know for her. You'll have to ask her. Oh yeah, absolutely. Because she was extremely enthusiastic, full of energy, full of optimism, full of joy, full of pranks, all of that. In fact, the biggest fun was for us was to violate the curfew in the Mahila Nivas, where she used to stay. And there was a curfew there at 9 o'clock. She had to be back in the hostel. So therefore, our biggest challenge was, how do we make sure that she can get in at 10 o'clock?
How often did she make it back at 10, sir?
Oh, I think on an average, we violated the curfew about almost 30 times, definitely. Yeah.
Well, speaking of violations and speaking about that, the chase, if I could call it that, how long did it take for you to convince Sudha Murthy that she should say yes to the proposal? And incidentally, while we're sort of letting out secrets here, you want to tell us how you proposed to her, and not the most romantic proposals, I assure you that, but let him tell you the story.
Well, it was already getting to be 1977. 3 years, I had not had any success. Going through all kinds of indirect methods. I used to take us to dinners, of course, all at her cost. I had no money. We used to go to movies. We used to walk a long distance right from this Deccan Gymkhana that near Jangli Maharaj Road all the way to East Street and come back. I did everything, but there was no response. And in between, of course, some of the attempts that I did were disasters. For example, once her father had come to Pune, and she invited me. At that time, she was temporarily staying with somebody else. She invited me to that place, and her father asked me, "What do you want to do?" I said, if possible, I want to join a political party. And he said, "Yeah, that is fine. That is a hobby kind of stuff. But what do you want to do in life?" I said, "I want to start an orphanage." You know, even the most liberal, the most socially conscious man, when it comes to his daughter, let me tell you, I don't know of anybody who will accept a son-in-law who wants to be in politics, who want to start an orphanage. And when I said that, the next day when I met Sudha, I knew that I had blown up any chance I had. So anyway, the 77 was coming to an almost end. And then we were going in a rickshaw to East Street that day for dinner. We used to eat in Chungfa quite often. Then I took a lot of courage, and then I offered my hand, hoping that she would offer her hand. She didn't. So, so I held her hand and then said, "Look, I want to marry you. What do you think?" There was a possibility that she would have said no, the least painful one in terms of physical injury, but she could have pushed me out of the rickshaw. That would have been worse. Anyway, I said, "Look, I have to take this risk." But she was kind. She didn't say no, but she just smiled. And then I knew that that particular attempt had not been as disastrous as my earlier attempts. And the rest is history.
The rest is history, as they say. Well done, Mr. Murthy. Perhaps the most courageous act that you did. But, that brings me to the first C that I spoke about, and that has to do with companionship. Mrs. Murthy has actually played a very important role, not just in your evolution as an individual, but also in the start of Infosys. It was the money that she gave you, the 10,000 rupees to actually start Infosys with, and then you mustered together funds from family and friends, but it was actually seed capital that came in from Sudha Murthy that laid the genesis for Infosys. Describe for me what you believe are the pillars to make sure that you actually have a robust relationship, because very often when people talk about entrepreneurs, people talk about the highs of entrepreneurship, people talk about the recognition, the glory, the success. What they very often don't talk about is the personal sacrifices, the cost that glory and fame comes at. I've had a conversation with Mrs. Murthy, and she said that you were a weekend husband. She was a single parent. So explain to us what it takes to actually ensure that companionship stays.
Well, right from, we got married in 78, 10th February 1978. And then I told Sudha, I said, "Look, I know your father is totally disappointed with me. So therefore, I want to do something that will make him feel better about you." So she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Look, my attempt at Softronics has been a failure. I have to learn how to build a company, how to look at export market and all of that. Therefore, I said, I will join a company in Bombay. I'll become head of software, and I will do that." And that meant, of course, a lot of travel, all of that. But then I founded Infosys in 1981, 7th of July 1981. And the first few years, I decided to stay in India, and the rest 6 of my colleagues went abroad because we had no computer in India. Therefore, we couldn't do any value addition from India. And my work was first to raise a bank loan for approximately about 25 lakhs. Those days it was 7 rupees 30 paise per dollar, and this computer cost us about $300,000, about 25 lakhs of rupees. Second, that meant I had to go to Delhi by train from Pune and then from Bangalore, on an average about 3 times a month, and stay in the seediest hotel in Delhi near Old Delhi railway station, and then try to come to Bombay many times again by train, and try to get get meetings to get finance from various banks as well as in Bangalore, and then go abroad to sell to customers along with our partners, the database operation guys. So the result was, I must say that Akshata was born in 1980 and Rohan was born in 83. Most of the first 12 years or 13 years, almost till 1995, I used to travel about 10 months a year, and there was 1 year when I traveled 330 days. And then, somehow philosophically I said, even though I was 11 years older than my other colleagues, I said, I took 1/10 the salary of what I was getting earlier. I made sure they got 20% more. And then later on, I made sure that all the salaries were the same. But we had 2 children. So first of all, there was very little money. Second, all the time I was traveling. I was a surrogate father. And third, well, I don't know if I use the word correctly, but in some sense, I was an absentee father. That probably is the right word. And then, she had to make do with whatever little money we had. She had to bring up the 2 children. She had to satisfy the desires of 2 children. I still remember Akshata wanted to take part in a play in her school, and that required Akshata to get some new dress. And Sudha told them, look, we don't have money, therefore you can't take part in that play. So even today Akshata remembers it and tells us. So I think being a mother when there's an absentee father, to look after children, to bring them up, to keep them reasonably satisfied, to make both ends meet, and at the same time give optimism to her partner, that's not easy.
No, it isn't easy. And that brings me to the second C that I want to talk to you about, Mr. Murthy, and that has to do with communication. God knows that it's not easy running a company with a co-founder, but running a company with 6 co-founders is a Herculean task. You very often, in our previous interviews, talked about how Infosys used to be a debating society, but at the end of the day, one decision, and usually it used to be your decision, would take precedence. But explain to us the power of communication, the need for robust communication to ensure that everyone is aligned, everyone follows the same vision, everyone is running the same company as opposed to running different companies, because there must be many young entrepreneurs here, or there must be others who are looking at different opportunities. The power of communication in all aspects of our life is so critical.
Oh, absolutely. Several people have talked about it like you did, including Bill Gates. the ability to get along with 5 other people for 30 plus years is almost like marriage. At least in a marriage, there are clear, visible signs of that coming together, children. And therefore, both father and mother want to make the lives of the children better, and therefore they subordinate their egos and all of that. But in our case, even though emphasis was there, for many of my colleagues, probably it was not the same passion as a child. So therefore, coexisting with 5 other people, ensuring that the best of passion, energy, confidence and enthusiasm was brought into play in every day was not an easy task. And I would say that everybody played a very important role in that. But the most important requirement for all of us was, first of all, to communicate the objectives of whatever decision we wanted to take very clearly. And number 2, in that communication, people have to understand very clearly that it is the well-being of the group that is being given the highest priority, rather than well-being of any individual. That is very, very important. And to do that, the leader has to sacrifice much more than anybody else. That is the reality. If you want to be a leader, and if you want to lead 6 other or 5 other very bright, very smart, very enthusiastic youngsters, I tell you, the only instrument you have is leadership by example. And then you have to use data and facts, because nothing brings out objectivity of any decision as well as using data and facts. And I think finally, everybody has to see something positive for them in coming out of that decision. As long as it is common good, as long as that common good is very well articulated, as long as there is no personal agenda behind that decision, I think people will buy.
But you talked about how you've stayed together for over 30 years, and each co-founder has been extremely successful outside of Infosys as well. What do you think was the secret sauce? What was the glue that you believe held all of you together? I mean, it's easier said than done. You talked about the art of sacrifice as a leader. You talked about leading by example and so on and so forth. But in reality, it's not that simple, is it? Especially when egos are involved.
No, I think, Shereen, as always, you come to the heart of the matter very well. Even in this, you asked the right question. Let me take the analogy of a family. When do brothers and sisters come together at least once or twice or thrice a year? When do they share their joys and their sorrows? When the parents are living. When my mother and father were living, at least when my mother was living, she died in 2011. My sisters would come to my house, my brothers would come to my house, I would go to their house, etc., etc. But once those parents are gone, the bond of closeness somehow becomes weak. I mean, you can ask anybody. So therefore, somebody in that group has to play the role of the father or mother. And that father or mother has to be equidistant from all the 5 children. That's where Nandan used to make fun of me, saying that you are equally unpopular with all of us. Because there will be times when I have to defend Nandan, there will be times when I have to defend Chris, there will be times when I have to defend Dinesh, there will be times when I have to defend Raghavan, etc., etc. And many times that would be with the so-called professionals. But then I had to show the other four as well as these professionals that I am not biased in favor of one individual all the time. So I had to use data and facts, and I had to conduct myself so carefully that everybody had confidence in me.
So did you have a diary that this is Nandan's week to be admonished, this is Chris's week to get a hard time from you, this is Raghavan's week?
No, it has to come naturally. No, you cannot do it based on diary. Because then your logic will not be correct and they will clearly know that he is trying to satisfy that fellow. No, it has to come from heart, and all of them are smart people. And then you have to show that you have equal affection for all the younger people. That is very, very important. That's what parents do. You ask any mother whether you ask your mother whether she likes Shereen or her sister. She's not going to give answer. She will say, I like both of them. There are pluses and minuses on both the people. So that is very important.
Okay, which brings me to the next C, and that is competition. And it's an interesting story. I had Mr. Murthy on my show a couple of days ago, and this is when Azim Premji, the chairman of Wipro, completed 50 years in office. And I had Mr. Murthy join me to talk about Mr. Premji's contribution to the Indian IT sector. And you told me then in that interview that you had actually applied for a job at Wipro. You had interviewed with Azim Premji, and Azim Premji rejected you, and hence you went on to actually start Infosys.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. No, you put it better than I did. It's true. It's truth. Absolute truth.
So on that note, I want to talk to you because during the course of that conversation, what he also did tell me is that while both Infosys and Wipro were competing in the marketplace, you actually had conversations with Mr. Premji and his team. He had conversations with you, Nandan, and your team. Yeah. So, when we look at competition, it always sort of brings out this territorial, negative energy. But how do you ensure that competitors inspire each other, also challenge each other? What is the secret sauce there?
Well, I think if two competitors compete based on conducting themselves legally, ethically, with courtesy, then the probability of any of them trying to do unsavory things is reduced. Second, there is a level at which you compete. There is a level at which you cooperate. For example, in the software industry, Azim and I would compete for a $100 million or $200 million project. There, Azim has to put forward his best show and I have to put forward my best show, which we did. And he is a thorough professional. He is a wonderful human being. He understood that if we won it because we performed better. Similarly, if he won, we understood that because he did better. On the other hand, there were lots of issues that were common to all of us, vis-a-vis Indian government, vis-a-vis the talent availability, vis-a-vis the American government, vis-a-vis the UK government. There we would all be one. When we traveled, we would have dinners together, we would discuss in the evenings. In other words, you come closer to each other. You understand that the other party, which is competing very hard with you, is also a human being. It just so happens that he loves his company the best, just as I love my company the best. Loving one's company is not a crime. It is like Just because I love my mother most doesn't have to be that I hate your mother. That all of us have accepted that, right? So therefore, I would say that it is very, very important that both the competitors play the game fairly, legally and ethically. As long as you do that, as long as you don't do anything that you are ashamed of admitting in front of the other, I don't think there's an issue.
That brings me to then the next C, sir, and it's linked to what you just talked about, the level of cooperation. And what we're now starting to see, not just in the IT sector, but more so perhaps in the IT sector, is collaboration. Globally, specifically with companies like IBM and Apple and so on and so forth, Microsoft and GE. Do you believe that as markets become more and more saturated, as technology becomes more and more commoditized, you will start to see much more of these large collaborations?
Well, there are two reasons for that. First of all, thanks to Internet of Things, thanks to big data, thanks to cloud computing, the number of areas where multiple specialists can come together, create a win-win proposition, and add value to the customers has increased. For example, you can take the IBM hardware and on top of it put in either AWS or Azure from Microsoft and provide a service to a GE or whatever, Fortune 50 companies. That is a win-win-win solution. Therefore, as the industry is becoming more and more interconnected, as industry is becoming more and more integrated in terms of solutions, there are more opportunities. Otherwise, it's not easy to collaborate.
Not easy to collaborate?
No,
Is it harder in India, though, you believe, to collaborate than globally?
No, for example, Wipro and Infosys has collaborated exactly in the same manner. I think if I'm not wrong, it is Bank of Baroda, I may be wrong, or Central Bank, I don't know. One of the banks, Wipro provided the hardware, and it was Infosys Finacle that ran on top of that. It is a very clear example of two specialists coming together with a win-win proposition to add more and more value to a bank. A classical example.
Okay. So what was the difficulty or the challenge there?
Well, the difficulty or the challenge is simply that one of the two will have to be the leader in that solution. Now, generally, the rules of the game are that whosoever adds bigger monetary value in that solution. That is, let's say that in the offering that we gave to the bank, if it was 70 rupees from Wipro and 30 rupees from Infosys, it is inevitable that Wipro will be the leader, or vice versa. That has to be accepted. And number two, we don't want a curbside deal between our collaborator and the eventual customer, where that collaborator gets bigger share of the profits than us. That, I think, with Wipro, there has never been an issue. I don't think there will ever be, because Azim is a very decent human being. So as long as we follow the rules of the game, as long as each one of us realizes that this game can be scaled up only if I play by the rules that you and I have set together and you play by the same rules, then there is no issue. The problem arises when I agree with the rules that you and I have set,
Yeah.
and I try to cheat you behind your back.
Yes.
That is the biggest problem.
Which brings me to the next C, and that is compassion. And I want to quote you what Sudha Murthy told me in the interview that she did with me. She said, every human being is an island, and the only bridge is a relationship. It's about a kind word, it's about compassion, it's not always about money. You have given back significantly, and you continue to give back significantly through the Infosys Foundation in your personal capacity. Two questions here. Why this strong urge in that sense for philanthropy? And my second question to you, which is perhaps the harder question, is how do you detach yourself so much from wealth? I mean, you talked about the train journeys, and you talked about Akshata having to pull out of a performance because, Mrs. Murthy said she couldn't afford to buy the costume and so on and so forth. But even today, you have an almost sort of detachment or a sense of the wealth not mattering to you at all. How do you get to that point?
First of all, I think why philanthropy? I believe that capitalism is taking roots in India only in the recent past. It's a new phenomenon in India. If we want capitalism to be accepted by the vast majority of Indians, most of whom are poor, then the leaders of capitalism will have to conduct themselves in a fair and compassionate manner. The general public must say, look, these guys are not cheats. Yes, they are smart, and they are reaping the benefits of their smartness, their hard work, their passion, etc., etc. And they are doing nothing wrong as laid down by the society. I think that is very, very important. So therefore, I believe that it is very, very important for every leader of capitalism in India to walk the extra mile, to demonstrate his or her concern for the vast island of poverty that exists in India, and contribute in their own small way to alleviate that suffering. I think that's the reason why every leader of capitalism in India has to embrace compassionate capitalism.
Are you encouraged by what you see today in India? Do you see enough of compassionate capitalism, or do you see more of crony capitalism?
No, I don't see much of compassionate capitalism. I'm sure it will happen, but I think we could have made a lot more progress.
But what will make it happen? The assumption was that people will voluntarily give back and so on and so forth. Now you actually have corporate social responsibility being made mandatory as part of the Companies Act, where you're telling companies that you must spend 2% of your profits yearly on corporate social responsibility and so on and so forth. Do you believe that regulation is the answer to addressing this issue, or is it a mindset change that will address this issue more meaningfully?
No, but Shereen, you know better than I do, better than all the leaders of capitalism, that you cannot mandate heart. You cannot mandate heart. Compassion comes from heart. Compassion comes from the milieu in which you have grown up. Compassion comes from your understanding of the less fortunate people in the society. Compassion comes from your parents, your teachers, your friends who tell you why it is good to not to be greedy, right? So therefore, government regulations can only do so much. You have to go beyond that. There is this 2% stuff. So many people in this country have set up their own foundations, their brothers, sisters, relatives, etc., etc. And reasonable part of that is going for their upkeep. I'm sorry to say that. So therefore, I don't think government can do beyond what it has done. I think I appreciate what government has done. What is important is for people to understand that they too were one day not so not so rich or not so wealthy, and it is this society that has created the opportunity to escape the orbit of poverty, and therefore it is a good idea for us to contribute a little bit. Now, all of this comes from how you have been brought up, how your culture, your parents, your teachers, etc. Let me give you one simple example. Last night, Manjari asked me, do you need a car later? I said, no, Manjari, I don't need any car. So then I was expecting this friend of mine with whom I was supposed to have dinner to bring his car. He didn't bring. So he came and he thought I had the car. So then I told him, I said, why don't we get into this rickshaw and go? I had the most marvelous rickshaw ride in Pune. After 21 years. So the point I'm making is not boasting about that. It's just that I genuinely enjoyed that. See, when Sudha and I used to go in rickshaws, going in that rear engine rickshaw was a great fun, you know, and I enjoyed it, and that's it. So the point I'm saying is, if we can make as much effort to get back to our roots, then it is easier to appreciate the problems of the less fortunate ones.
I just want to take this point forward because, you know, I had the privilege of interviewing Warren Buffett when he was in India, and along with Bill Gates, he has the giving pledge where he's giving away most of his wealth, or all of his wealth, in fact. And I asked him, I said, how did you communicate that to your children, for instance? How did you get them to accept the choice that you were making? What is it like for you? What has it been like for you in order to communicate how you want to live your life, the choices that you've made with regards to money and so on and so forth to your children, for instance?
You know, I'll tell you, I'm very lucky in the sense that my son is much more socialistic, left-leaning than I am. Both my children are ultimate liberals. For them, in any situation, even by mistake, if Sudha or I conduct ourselves in a way that we are seen as 1% unfair to somebody in our house or anywhere who are less fortunate, or they would get upset. So I don't think that has been a problem, because we are very lucky. Both of them are left of center.
Okay, which brings me to the last C on my list, and that is conscience. In I think pretty much every interview that we've done over the past 15 years, you've always told me, I wish the emphasis was on a respectability index and not on the world's richest men and the world's richest leaders and so on and so forth. I wish people would focus more on the most respectable, and there would actually be a respectability index. In business, and we talked about compassion and we talked about compassionate capitalism, you know, as long as you're not in violation of the law and so on and so forth, that's fine. But when you have to make choices, that may not necessarily violate the law in letter, but may violate the law in spirit. You know, what does your moral compass tell you? How do you make that judgment?
I think the judgment judgment process is made easy if you ask, or if I ask, whether this action of mine will enhance respect for me in the eyes of the people that work with me or people around me, people, my juniors, my seniors, my peers, etc. Second, if you if you apply the golden rule, that is, do unto others what you would want them to do unto you. I think if we ask these two questions, by and large you will mitigate the possibility of violating the law both in the letter and in spirit, by and large. But at the end of the day, we are all human beings. So therefore,
Have you had to face this dilemma? I'm sure you've had to.
Well, we have had to face, but somehow, I am very strong-willed. Therefore, I took the decision. For example, we were asked bribe long time ago, 1984. And I said no. So then the gentleman, the customs officer in Bangalore Customs at that point of time, he said, then I won't honor this concessional duty certificate. I said, here is the phone number. I'll pay for the phone. Call the joint secretary who has issued this letter in Department of Electronics. He said, no, it's not my job to do that. You're not being reasonable, therefore I will not do it. So he made us pay 10 lakhs of extra duty. We went through right up to the IT appellate tribunal and we won it, but it took 9 years. At that time, 10 lakhs of rupees was almost like today's 40,000 crore for Infosys. That is 10 lakhs at that time in 1994, considering Infosys revenue, Infosys cash flows, everything, is like 40,000 crores of money today for Infosys. But because I am slightly crazy in some of these things, I just said, no, I won't do that. But I must be very careful. Tomorrow, if it is the life of somebody that is very close to me, that's somebody that is a very close friend or somebody, my family members, and if the doctor were to demand something, I don't know whether I would say no. I am not sure. I am not at all sure. So it is not right on my part to say that in all situations I will conduct. No, that is. So I fully understand. There are so many people I have seen, so many youngsters who have been harassed. But they can do only. Oops.
Is that the joint secretary
No,
of the IT department calling you now, Mr. Murthy, for having relived that story?
So therefore, I would only say the best thing that we can do is to try very, very hard not to become a victim of these things. And who knows, maybe 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, you may become a victim. But then we are all not God, we are not saints, we are not living in Himalayas all alone, right? We are interacting. We have to live in this society. So therefore, as long as we move towards good values, to me that is good enough.
We're pretty much at the end of our time, so my last question to you, Mr. Murthy. You've had phenomenal success. You've built a company that is well respected, that has grown significantly over the past 3 decades or so. You've got all of this fame and recognition. If I were to ask you to pin down 3 things that you would like to do today, what would those be?
That's really not at the microeconomic level. it has to be at the macroeconomic level. Somehow in 1991, when economic liberalization took place, at that time you were a child, so you would not, probably you couldn't have appreciated that.
Yes, I was in school then.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I genuinely hoped that we would have had much greater success in abolishing poverty. Somehow that has not happened. That's one thing I hope will happen at least in the next 30 years or something. In fact, Ramesh and I were discussing this issue. Second, India and Indians, we must understand that the only way you can make India powerful is not through speeches, is not through waving our national flag, is not through saying Mera Bharat Mahan, all of that is only through performance. And therefore, every Indian has to focus on execution. And somehow that has not picked up the pace that you and I wanted. I hope in the next 30 years that focus on execution will come. I won't be there. Definitely I won't be there at that time. But if it happens, I think it will be good. You will be there, and you know.
I don't know, sir.
No, you will be there.
I wouldn't guarantee it.
The probability is much higher than mine, so the expected value is higher. The third thing is that in some way we South Asians, if we can form some kind of a federation, it doesn't have to be political. It's not like, you know, India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all of them. We all become part of that federation, like European Union is. In some way, a platform. In some platform.
Someone is desperately trying to reach you.
No, you know who it is. Pandu. I should have switched off. You know, in some way, if all of us can see what is more common to us than what differentiates us, and make sure that all of us together create platform to make the poor in India better, poor in Pakistan better, poor in Sri Lanka better, poor in Bhutan better, poor in Nepal better, poor in Bangladesh better. I think that to me would be a great success.
So let me finally end by once again going back to the interview that I did with Mrs. Murthy, and this was 2007, and she said the one thing that she misses most about you is the fact that you don't smile or laugh as much anymore. And I would imagine that's because you were trying very hard to play the responsible parent for everybody else at Infosys. But any better on that front today?
Yeah, I think I smile a lot more today. I go to movies with her. I'm reliving the younger days. I enjoy going to movies in theaters. Somehow I don't like watching movie on TV, DVD.
Which was the last movie you saw?
You know, we went and saw that Airlift. In fact, that this thing, ringtone is on this, right? No, you know, I'll tell you, I come from a family of public servants. I have tremendous respect for public servants. My father was one, my uncle was one, everybody and his brother in the family was. And where sometimes when I make strong remarks, those remarks come out of my frustration that some of these people are not doing what they can indeed do. Because I have seen my father, I have seen my uncle, so many people. So therefore, when I saw that movie, I was really moved. So that's the reason why I put that ringtone on this.
Mr. Murthy, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here today, for sharing your thoughts with our audience. Pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.